You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, why am I about to fall over? Hello. So I've been wanting to make one of these for a while because I have so many thoughts on the Sherlock Holmes lore and how people have chosen to adapt that through the last, I think we're at like 200 years it's been around. I thought I'd start out with going over some shows that are Sherlock Holmes adjacent. I don't necessarily use like, oh, the two main characters, their names are Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. But instead they have the dynamics of the Sherlock Holmes books where you have detective / smart character who solves things, and you have the buddy sidekick who isn't necessarily as smart as the other character, but is important in the emotional side and has other knowledge that benefits the smart character. So I feel like there's two main shows that I want to discuss, at least in this video, that are Sherlock Holmes adjacent to me. First one is Psych. It follows our main character, Sean Spencer. One day calls into a police department, solves a crime, and goes on to claim that he is a psychic detective. So we follow him working together with the police department, who do not think he's exactly psychic, but are kind of going along with it because he's so intelligent. Sean has a best friend called Gus, and Gus most of the time is walking around with him. They're best friends. They've been best friends forever. Gus knows that he's not a psychic and knows that he actually is just extremely intelligent. Psych definitely has much more of a like lighthearted vibe. It's such a funny show. They're constantly making jokes, and Sean puts up a front of being this sort of comedian and being kind of crazy, but underneath he really is an extremely intelligent character. Other characters that resemble the Sherlock Holmes sort of archetypes, you have Lassiter, who's the head of the police department. He does not like Sean, he doesn't like his antics, and he's kind of upset that Sean is smarter than he is and can solve the crimes quicker than he does, and he's the biggest skeptic when it comes to Sean being a psychic. He sort of falls into the role of Lestrade, where he isn't as smart and he's kind of played off for laughs because he can't put connections together the same way that our main character can. There's also the Mycroft character, which is kind of a silly thing, but it's Sean's father who he gets most of his training from. So Sean has an eidetic memory, which means whenever he sees something, hears something, anything, he can remember it photographic. His father noticed that from a young age. And as a detective, he thought he could utilize that, so he trained Sean to think critically and to use those skills to solve crimes and to remember everything around him so he could one day also be a detective. And so he sort of falls into the role of where Mycroft sort of is, where they go to him when they need extra help, and he is in some ways smarter than Sean when it comes to solving mysteries, but like Mycroft, he doesn't really do much. He has connections, and Sean uses those connections, but he doesn't necessarily help out directly until later in the show. There's also junior detective Juliet O'Hara, who is working as a partner to Lassiter, and Juliet, she's tricky. She falls into the other category of characters who aren't necessarily in the Arthur Conan Doyle stories, but like the romance person. Like, she has this very long-standing relationship with Sean that goes through a lot of different phases and stages and stuff. And there's not really a character like that in the original Sherlock Holmes story. But overall, it very much follows the theme of every Sherlock Holmes book. You see Sean and Gus just chilling around, someone comes to them with a mystery or they stumble upon one, and they need to solve it through only the specialized manner in which they can. And one of my favorite parts of this show is that they utilize the Sherlock and Watson dynamic so well. Because Sean as a character is too wacky most of the time, and he doesn't have this sort of school knowledge that Sherlock Holmes had. He sort of has the detective knowledge that he's learned, but most of the time, a lot of his thoughts are taken over by like movies and stuff, and it relies on Gus to be the voice of reason in their relationship. And so he is the opposite of Watson in a lot of ways, because he grounds Sherlock in a way that is with like reason and logic. And Gus is also a pharmaceutical salesman. He sells drugs, which, again, another similarity between him and Watson. They both work in the medical field. And a lot of his knowledge is dedicated to that, and so he can help Sean out when it comes to, like, knowing if a specific, like, pill someone took, is actually what it was supposed to be. Sometimes he refers to his nose as, I think, the super sniffer, and he uses that to recognize scents, which is a very fun aspect of the show, but a little interesting. I wish they would have done that in the original books, but whatever. Sort of Watson character of, oh, I have to go along with this. But in a lot of ways, he's given the opportunity to be just as goofy and as wacky as Sean is. And I think that's something that a lot of shows need to utilize, because the thing is, Watson and Sherlock, they match each other's freak. The reason they're together is that they have special things that connect them. And a lot of the problems with modern Sherlock shows is that they don't have a reason for the Watson character to stick around with Holmes. I'm probably going to make a video about this later, but the BBC Sherlock, I have a lot of opinions regarding this, but one of the biggest ones, I think, is that there's no reason for John to stick around with Sherlock. Sherlock is not kind to him in that version. Maybe the only reason is financial, but even then, he could get a job, and their excuse for it is like, oh, well, he likes mystery, he likes danger. But in this show, in Psych, there is a real reason why they stick together. It's because they're best friends. They've been friends since, I think, like, first grade, and Sean knows Gus better than anyone, and allow each other to be deeper parts of themselves. When Gus is around Sean, he can let loose and, like, have fun with himself in a way he did when he was a kid. And with Gus, Sean gets to be appreciated for his skills, because if Gus wasn't there, nobody would know he was a genius. And Gus gives him that opportunity to, like, be grounded to the earth, because before they met up together and started this psychic detective agency, Sean had, like, I think they say it's like 50 jobs, and he traveled all across, like, the US. And once he met up with Gus and they started the business, because they were together and because he had Gus's sense of, like, business and finances, they were able to he was able to stay in one place without fear and without, like, getting kicked out or getting bored of the job. And they stay together because they're friends, and that's the biggest relationship of the show, I think. It's the fact that Sean and Gus are best friends, and they've been through so much together, and yet they both still stick around. And that really captures the essence of the Sherlock Holmes stories, which are, in some cases, just a love letter to the friendship of these two men, of the bond that they share, and how it makes both of them better people in the end. So Psych, on my little rating scale, I'm going to give it a rating here. I really don't want to do this right now, so I'll do it after I'm done filming. It should be here. Yeah, here's how I figure out how to do this rating. It's going to be 0 out of 100. Like, 70s is good range. I'd say 80s to 90s is like, you should watch this if you like Sherlock Holmes. And 50s, The next show I wanted to discuss is House MD. And I've seen, I think it's like, I'm on season 4, season 5. We follow Greg House, he's the head of diagnostics at this hospital. And he has a very peculiar way of, like, solving things and working out how patients have their illnesses and working out why they're sick. His mantra for the beginning of the show is that everybody lies, and he includes himself in that everybody lies, and so he can't trust the patients when they're talking to him, so he relies on information, like body language, and he doesn't really listen to anything they say. And he falls into the archetype of the Sherlock Holmes. He's smart, but he's kind of blunt and rude. He knows that he's smarter than everyone, and therefore he doesn't see the reason why he should be polite and why he should be kind, because as he thinks, everybody lies, therefore why talk to them at all? And then there's the Watson character, which is the head of oncology, James Wilson. And I love Wilson. I'm gonna get that out of the way right now. Again, I might be a little biased, but he is a really cool Watson character. He doesn't exactly fit, but he works in oncology, so he automatically has a job where he has to tell people bad news. He has to use compassion to talk to them and to tell them that they have cancer and tell them how they can fix that. And him and House have very different styles of approaching patients. And so it makes for very interesting interactions between the two of them, because both characters are actually best friends. They're very close to one another, and I think one of the central themes of this show is their friendship, because House goes through so many awful things, and he does so many awful things. He's a horrible friend, not a great person sometimes, but through all of it, Wilson stays, and Wilson also is not a great person. He's not a great friend sometimes, but they both, like Watson and Holmes should, they allow themselves to be different people when they're together. Wilson, he is able to show a mean side. There's one of my favorite episodes where they have a prank war going on. He walks with a cane because of an incident with his leg a while ago. He had an infarction. And during their prank war, House is walking down the hallway. He has a cane in his hand. He has his cane, and then it breaks, and he falls onto the floor, which is something that is so awful and so humiliating. It happens later in the show, and he beats a dude up for it. But in this instance, he just sees Wilson giggling behind them, and he smiles, and it's like the warmest expression he's given anyone in the show, and it shows that they understand each other on such a deep level. Another thing I like is that the names House and Wilson, Holmes and Watson, obviously it's kind of fun, but their first names, Greg and James, I think may be a callback to other characters from the Arthur Conan Doyle stories. For like James Moriarty is Moriarty, but James, and then Gregory Lestrade. Is that his name? I think that's his name. I'll correct that if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Oh, I'm thinking of Gregson. Gregory Lestrade and Gregson. Yeah. His name is Gregory Lestrade. Gregory Lestrade. Okay. So those names potentially a connection, but Moriarty's the one I really remember, and I think they did such a good job because problems with other shows, BBC Sherlock, is that they put way too much emphasis on Moriarty. And they're like, oh my gosh, he is the big baddie, he's awful. But really, in the books, he's only in like 2 books. And yes, he is in the book where Sherlock Holmes dies, but he's only in 2 books. So I think this show does a really good job of just introducing Moriarty. He shoots House, and is not good for him, but like in the books, he just kind of shoots him and is on his way, and I think that's a good way to handle it. Psych also has a Moriarty character that is referred to by the Yin Yang Killer, and this is, I love those episodes. They are really good. Spoilers ahead for like everything in case you haven't seen it, but I'm getting distracted though. So I think both shows are really good examples of how you utilize this dynamic and how both characters, both the Holmes and the Watson character, have to make each other better. There should be a reason that they stick together. And yes, they should fight. But in the end, both shows are about their friendship, and that captures what I think the original stories are about, that like they both have found each other and have found solace in one another, because Watson is war-hardened, he has no real zest, and then Sherlock, he arguably has too much zest, and he just, he arguably, cares too much. But when they meet each other, they both balance each other out. Yes, these shows are technically Sherlock Holmes adjacent, but truly they are shows that I would consider to be things you should watch if you want to understand the dynamic more, and if you want to know how the characters interact, because they both have very different ways of handling the relationship between the two, but they both do it so well. If you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, you've read the original books, maybe you've watched some of the shows that are direct adaptations, I really recommend these too because they're not only Sherlock Holmes and they have stuff to do with that, but they also have the added benefit of being their own show and having their own plot. I'm probably going to talk way more about the BBC Sherlock later on this channel, so like tune if you want to see that. But yeah, thanks for watching if you've gotten this far. I like talking about this a lot, so I don't know if this is going to be the most entertaining, but it is out there, so thank you for watching.